The string quartet was playing, sunlight bouncing off the crystal vases, when I realized I'd been seated in the last row, behind the florist's assistant and next to the catering staff. My son's wedding, and I was treated like a stranger. My heart thudded louder than the music, each laugh from the front slicing a little deeper. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Sometimes the people you love most are the ones who teach you what dignity really means. I sat there, clutching my small purse like armor, pretending not to notice the stares or the distance between me and my own child. I had no idea that this quiet humiliation would open the door to something far greater. Let me show you how it all began. It's strange how a day can begin with so much quiet hope and still end up breaking your heart. That morning, I had woken before the sun, my hands trembling slightly as I pressed the pale blue dress I'd saved for months to wear to my son's wedding. Ethan, my only boy. My reason for getting up every morning after my husband passed away. I remember whispering to myself that this day would be worth every sacrifice, every late-night grading session, every meal I skipped so he could have what he needed. I had imagined sitting proudly near the front, watching him exchange vows, feeling his eyes meet mine just once in gratitude. But when I arrived at the church, something felt off right away. The usher glanced at my invitation, hesitated, and then led me toward the back, the last row. I thought maybe there was a mistake, but when I looked up, I saw rows of elegant women in soft silk and tailored suits filling the seats near the front. Her family, I assumed. Lily's, the Ashfords. They looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine, all laughter and confidence, while I found myself clutching my small clutch purse like it was a shield. I sat quietly, trying to steady my breathing, pretending it didn't sting. But it did. Every detail of that moment cut a little deeper. The soft scent of expensive perfume, the whispers behind manicured hands, the polished smiles that never turned my way. My name wasn't on any of the family lists they read aloud. I wasn't even introduced when the photographer took pictures. It was as if I had been erased. I reminded myself that I wasn't here for them. I was here for my son. The same boy who once clung to my leg when he was scared of thunderstorms. The same boy who promised me he'd make me proud one day. And yet, sitting there, surrounded by strangers in glittering dresses, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. My heart wanted to be happy for him, but my eyes burned, and I couldn't tell if it was from pride or pain. I tried to straighten my back, to keep my chin lifted. I told myself not to let it show. But when Ethan walked down the aisle and his eyes slid past me, just for a second, but long enough to feel it, I felt something inside me falter. The organ music swelled, and everyone rose, but I couldn't move for a heartbeat. My legs felt heavy, rooted in the kind of sadness you can't put into words. I wanted to disappear, yet I also wanted someone, anyone, to notice that I was there, to see me. And then, as I sat through the vows, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, someone slipped into the empty seat beside me. I didn't turn right away. I only sensed a quiet presence, calm and unbothered by the spectacle unfolding ahead. For the first time that day, I felt seen. I didn't know it then, but that simple moment, someone choosing to sit beside me when everyone else looked past me, would change everything. When he sat beside me, I felt it before I even saw him. The air shifted, barely, but enough for my body to notice. After what felt like an eternity of being invisible, the weight of another person's quiet presence beside me felt almost shocking. It was as if someone had stepped into my loneliness without asking for permission. And instead of resisting, I found myself breathing a little easier. He didn't move much. He didn't make a sound. Yet something about him filled the empty space I'd been sitting in. I caught a faint trace of aftershave, clean, understated, familiar in a way that tugged at something buried deep in memory. I didn't dare look right away. I was afraid that if I turned, the illusion of comfort might disappear. But then I noticed the ripple his presence caused. Heads began to turn. Whispers fluttered like restless wings down the aisle. People who had spent the past hour pretending not to see me suddenly couldn't stop looking. The pity in their eyes turned to curiosity. Even the woman seated 2 rows ahead, one who'd tossed me a glance of silent judgment earlier, shifted uncomfortably, as though she'd just realized I wasn't as disposable as she thought. I didn't understand what was happening, but I felt something stir inside me, a quiet spark, small but steady. For the first time that day, I didn't feel ashamed of where I was sitting. Somehow, this stranger's calm confidence seemed to lend me a little of his own dignity. I sat taller without realizing it, my shoulders no longer folded inward. When I finally glanced sideways, I caught only fragments, a strong jawline, silver at his temples, a hint of kindness in his expression. He didn't look at me, not directly, but I had the strange sense that he knew exactly how much that moment mattered to me. And then I saw it. My son, standing at the altar, his eyes sweeping the crowd before landing on the back row. For a heartbeat, his composure faltered. I couldn't read the emotion in his face. Was it confusion? Worry, maybe guilt? Whatever it was, he clearly recognized the man sitting beside me. My pulse quickened. Who was he? Why did his presence seem to rattle everyone else while grounding me? I tried to focus on the ceremony, but every vow and every song blurred into background noise. My mind chased after fragments of memory, trying to place a face I was certain I had seen before, long ago, in another life. When the final notes of music filled the hall and the guests began to stand, I felt a quiet certainty that this man's arrival wasn't an accident. Something had shifted. The day that had begun as my humiliation had somehow turned into a question, a mystery. And deep down, I knew the answer would change everything. When I heard his name, it was like the air left the room. Thomas Blake. It struck me with a softness that still managed to shake me to my core. That name had lived somewhere deep inside me for 50 years, like an old song you haven't heard in decades, yet somehow still remember every word. I turned toward him, really looked this time, and there it was. The same quiet steadiness in his eyes, the same kind smile that once made my 17-year-old heart race on summer evenings by the lake. In that moment, the years between us folded in on themselves. I wasn't a 68-year-old widow sitting in the back row of her son's wedding. I was a girl again, barefoot, laughing, leaning against his old Chevy truck while the radio played some soft tune that would later break my heart every time it came on. We had met in a small town outside Charleston, back when life felt simple and the world was still something we both believed we could shape. He used to bring me wildflowers he'd picked himself, never roses. He said wildflowers were honest, unpretentious, and real. That was him. Thomas Blake was the kind of boy who looked you straight in the eye when he spoke, and somehow made you feel like the only person in the world worth listening to. And then, one summer evening, it all ended. My mother, practical, protective, and proud, told me he wasn't the kind of man I was supposed to marry. He came from a working-class family, and she had other plans for me. I remember the night I watched his truck disappear down the road, believing he had stopped writing. I never knew she'd taken the letters. Standing there in that church, with the organ still echoing in the distance, I realized how many years had been built on that misunderstanding. How many choices, how much life had been shaped by silence. He told me, softly, that he had searched for me once, long ago, but stopped when he heard I'd married. He never did. It felt strange, standing before someone who remembered the unedited version of me, the girl before motherhood, before grief, before the quiet kind of loneliness that creeps in after loss. His presence reminded me of who I was, before life demanded I become so strong. We spoke in fragments, glances, smiles, pauses filled with 50 years of unspoken words, and for the first time in so long, I felt warmth spread through me, not from nostalgia, but from something living, breathing, real. As we walked toward the reception hall, side by side, I realized that maybe life doesn't forget. Maybe it waits, for timing, for courage, for the right kind of second chance. And as I caught our reflection in the glass doors, two older faces softened by time, but still recognizable beneath the years, I couldn't help but smile. The girl I once was wasn't gone after all. She'd just been waiting for him. When we entered the reception hall, I felt it immediately, the shift. Conversations slowed, laughter softened, and for the first time that day, every head seemed to turn in my direction. It was the same crowd that had pretended not to notice me just hours earlier, yet now their eyes followed me with a kind of restless curiosity. I didn't need to look to know why. Thomas walked quietly beside me, steady and unbothered, carrying the kind of presence that didn't need to be announced. The music floated through the air, soft jazz played by a small band in the corner, and the scent of gardenias hung heavy above the white tablecloths. I remember feeling oddly detached, as if I were watching my own life tilt on its axis. The same people who had judged me by my simple dress and quiet manners now greeted me with sudden warmth. Compliments, small smiles, polite nods. All of it too late, and yet somehow satisfying. When I caught my son's eyes across the room, the confusion there was unmistakable. He smiled, but it didn't reach his face. Lily, his new wife, clung to his arm, whispering something behind a fixed smile that never quite reached her eyes either. I didn't need to hear her words to know what they were. Questions, maybe even panic. It struck me as almost poetic how the same people who made me feel invisible were now unsettled by the quiet company of the man beside me. Inside, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't name. A part of me wanted to relish the justice of it all, but another part, the mother in me, ached for my son. I didn't want to embarrass him. I only wanted to exist, to be seen with the same simple dignity I had always carried. Thomas, as always, seemed to sense what I didn't say. At one point, he excused himself to greet the bride's father, shaking his hand with a calm, assured ease. I watched the man's expression shift from polite indifference to sudden attentiveness. Later, as we sat together again, Thomas leaned in slightly and told me something that nearly made me laugh out loud. He mentioned, almost offhandedly, that he'd recently acquired the building downtown, the one where Lily's family business operated. It had been part of a larger investment, nothing personal, he said. Still, the irony struck so deep I almost couldn't speak. Life, it seemed, had an impeccable sense of timing. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile outwardly. I just sat there, my hands resting gently on the tablecloth, feeling the weight of years lift quietly off my shoulders. The universe, I thought, has its own rhythm. Slow, deliberate, but fair. As the evening went on, I realized I didn't need to reclaim anything. My dignity had never been lost. It had simply been waiting for the right light to be seen again. And as I looked toward the head table, where my son sat stiffly beside his bride, I felt no bitterness, only calm. The kind that comes when life finally balances itself without you having to say a single word. The restaurant was one of those places where everything gleamed. Polished floors, low amber lighting, the faint sound of a piano drifting through the air. Ethan had chosen it carefully. I could tell from the way he smiled too wide when I arrived, and the way Lily stood to greet me, her hand already clutching the menu as though she'd been rehearsing hospitality. I smiled back, but something in the air felt off. It was too perfect, too smooth, like glass hiding a crack. As I sat down, I noticed the glances they exchanged, the way they waited for me to mention Thomas. I didn't. I spoke about the weather, about the roses in my garden, about how Denver looked beautiful at sunset. But underneath the small talk, there was tension, subtle, pulsing, almost audible. My son's voice was careful, polite, but it carried a nervous energy that didn't sound like love. It sounded like strategy. He told me how proud he was of me, how sorry he felt for the misunderstanding at the wedding. The words came out polished, but they didn't land. They hovered in the air like something borrowed. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. And Lily, she smiled too often. Her laughter pitched just a little too high. Her charm deliberate. For years, I'd have taken this moment as a victory, proof that I'd finally earned their respect. But sitting there, with the silverware glinting under the dim light, I saw the truth. Respect offered for the wrong reasons isn't respect at all. It's convenience. For most of my life, I accepted crumbs of approval, telling myself that love meant staying quiet, grateful for whatever was offered. But something inside me had shifted. Maybe it was Thomas's presence reminding me of who I once was. Maybe it was time. Either way, I no longer felt small. I thanked them softly, truly, but I didn't fill the silence afterward. I let it sit there, heavy and real. I told my son how proud I was, not because of success or money, but because I had raised him with everything I had. Whether he saw that or not no longer changed what was true. When the check came, I reached for it. Lily protested, of course, all flustered kindness, but I insisted. I wanted it clear that I owed no one, not even gratitude that wasn't sincere. Outside, the evening air was cool against my skin, carrying the faint hum of city traffic. I walked slowly, the lights of Denver glittering around me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weighed down by disappointment. I felt free. As I looked up at the night sky, I sensed something was coming. A storm. Maybe, but not the kind that breaks you. The kind that clears the air. It was a quiet morning. The kind I had come to treasure. Sunlight spilling softly through the curtains. A cup of coffee cooling beside the window, and the hum of the neighborhood just beginning to stir. I was still thinking about the dinner, about how peace sometimes comes not from winning, but from letting go. And then I saw it, the sleek black sedan pulling into my driveway. Even before the door opened, I knew this wasn't a social call. Carol Ashford stepped out like she owned the ground beneath her feet. Perfectly pressed suit, diamond earrings catching the morning light, the faint scent of expensive perfume that filled the air like a claim of superiority. When I opened the door, her smile was all politeness and calculation, the kind of smile that hides a sharp edge. She glanced around my modest living room as if appraising it for sale, her eyes pausing on the worn armchair, the chipped picture frame, the stack of library books on my table. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. Her discomfort filled the silence. It didn't take her long to get to the point. She spoke about business in a casual tone that didn't fool me, how her family's company was facing an unfortunate delay with their property lease renewal. Then she mentioned Thomas's name, as though dropping it would open doors. Her gaze met mine, steady, assessing. That's when she reached into her purse and slid a check across my table. $50,000. Her words were polite, but their meaning was clear. She wanted to buy my cooperation, my silence, my influence. For a moment, I just stared at it. $50,000. Once, that kind of money could have changed everything. Paid off the house, replaced my old car, maybe even softened the edges of retirement. But now, all I felt was heat rising in my chest. Not temptation, but insult. I thought of every year I'd spent teaching children how to stand up for themselves, how to tell right from easy. I thought of every moment I'd swallowed my pride to keep peace. And then, slowly, deliberately, I picked up the check and tore it in half. The sound was soft, almost fragile, but to me it felt like thunder. Carol's face hardened. She stood, muttered something about regret, and left with the same chill she'd brought in. I didn't follow her to the door. I just stood there, breathing in the quiet she left behind. As I looked out the window at her car disappearing down the street, I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my chest. Not victory, something deeper. Freedom. I had finally learned that dignity doesn't need witnesses. It just needs courage. The wind outside picked up slightly, brushing the curtains aside. Somewhere deep down, I could sense that this wasn't the end, only the calm before the storm. The hall shimmered with soft gold light, the kind that flatters everything it touches. Crystal glasses chimed, laughter floated between tables, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's world. Thomas stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on mine as we entered the charity luncheon. The same people who once turned away from me now greeted me with warmth, some out of guilt, some out of genuine change. I smiled, not to gloat, but because I finally understood how fleeting judgment can be. The air buzzed with polite tension. I could feel it before I saw them. Lily and her mother, sitting stiffly near the stage, their smiles brittle, their posture too perfect. They avoided my eyes at first, as if pretending I wasn't there could undo what they knew was coming. I took my seat beside Thomas, calm, composed, grounded. When Lily was called to the podium, a hush fell over the room. Her hands trembled slightly as she held her note cards. Her voice, usually so assured, quivered as she spoke words that didn't come easily. She admitted the mistakes, the arrogance, the thoughtlessness. It wasn't grand or dramatic. It was human. And that, somehow, made it matter more. I listened in silence, not out of coldness, but peace. The anger that once burned in me had long since gone out. What replaced it was something gentler, steadier, a sense of completion. When she finished, our eyes met across the room. I nodded, just once. It was enough. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't about erasing the past. It's about no longer letting it define you. As the applause rose softly around us, Thomas stood and offered his hand. We walked out together, the sun spilling through the tall windows, warm and unashamed. Behind us, the same faces that once pitied me now looked on with something closer to respect. Outside, the air was bright and clean. I took a deep breath, letting it fill the space where hurt used to live. Justice, I thought, doesn't always arrive with noise or vengeance. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in the steady rhythm of your own heart finally at peace. The sunlight in my kitchen feels different now, softer, somehow. It spills across the counter where my teacup rests, warming my hands as if reminding me that peace doesn't come all at once. It seeps in quietly, like morning light through old curtains. When I think back to everything that's happened, the wedding, the humiliation, the stranger who wasn't a stranger at all, the son I love who lost his way, and the woman who tried to buy what can't be bought, it almost feels like a lifetime compressed into a few fragile weeks. But every wound left a lesson. Every moment of pain taught me something about who I am and who I refuse to stop being. For years, I thought dignity was something others gave you when they decided you'd earned it. I know now it's something you never let go of, even when others can't see it. Respect doesn't come from wealth, status, or polished manners. It comes from how you choose to carry yourself when the world turns its back. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about letting people off the hook. It's about setting yourself free. Holding on to anger only keeps you tied to the past. Letting go, on the other hand, makes room for peace, and peace is worth far more than pride. I don't wish bitterness on anyone, not my son, not Lily, not even Carol. I wish them understanding, because someday they'll learn what I did, that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the quiet strength of a woman who knows her worth. So, if you've ever felt invisible, dismissed, or made small by someone else's pride, remember this: you are not what they see. You are what you choose to be. And if my story touched something in you, I hope you'll share yours too. Tell me what you've overcome, what you've learned, and what dignity means to you. Sometimes, our quiet stories are the ones that heal the loudest.